Amidst the suffocating heat of São Paulo, a motorbike courier crosses the city without imagining his routine is about to be broken. At the traffic light, an injured female dog appears out of nowhere and completely changes his destiny. Following the animal's instinct, he finds a man fallen on the verge of death and with a millionaire secret. From this improbable encounter, an alliance is born that will challenge the powerful and reveal truths buried in the asphalt. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us what city you are watching us from. We continue. Amid the constant noise of horns, sirens, and engines, New York City sweltered under the heat of a sluggish Thursday. The asphalt released waves of heat that made the air seem distorted, and the rush pulsed like blood in the arteries of a metropolis that never slowed down. Between cars that were bumper to bumper and motorcycles that snaked between lanes, no one seemed to have time for anything but their own commitments. In the middle of this invisible and noisy chaos, a motorcycle courier named Leo followed his routine. He was 33 years old, with a thermal backpack strapped to his back, a battered helmet he had been using for over 4 years, and a look that mixed exhaustion with resignation. He was just one among thousands who lived between deliveries, cancellations, and unpredictable tips, surviving on the margins of everything. Leo woke up every day at 5 in the morning, had a bitter black coffee, put on the uniform that no longer had its original color, and went out to face the streets. He had no family nearby. His parents had moved upstate years ago, tired of the violence and the impossible cost of living in the city. He stayed, because he believed that there, somehow, he could build something better. But the years passed and life remained the same, like a treadmill that never stopped. That day, Leo had already made 11 deliveries since 6 in the morning. His phone vibrated non-stop with new requests, and he barely had time for lunch. He had stopped at a hot dog cart on the BQE, devoured a hot dog in 3 bites, and returned to the frantic pace. The afternoon fell heavily on the city, and the traffic began to thicken as it always did at that time. He was on Lexington Avenue trying to cut through a side street when something interrupted the automatic rhythm of deliveries. While waiting for the light to change, Leo noticed a strange movement. A medium-sized dog, apparently injured, appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the left lane. Her golden fur was dirty, her paws covered in dust, and one of her hind legs dragged with difficulty. She limped with determination, as if carrying a mission in her eyes. Some drivers honked, others shouted, and most didn't even notice her presence. But the dog did not hesitate. Ignoring the imminent danger, she launched, herself in the direction of Leo's motorcycle, and collided with the front wheel. He was startled, gripped the handlebars tightly, and almost lost his balance. For a moment, he thought about shooing her away, about getting back on his way. He had 3 more deliveries waiting, and the app's algorithm was relentless with delays. But something in the animal's eyes paralyzed him. It wasn't fear, it wasn't desperation, it was urgency, an urgency he couldn't explain, but which he understood deep in his soul. The dog took 2 steps back, looked at him, and turned her body towards the sidewalk, on the other side of the avenue. With difficulty, she continued limping, glancing over her shoulder as if she wanted him to follow. Against all logic, Leo turned off the motorcycle, took off his helmet, and began to follow the animal with his eyes. The light turned green, cars honked behind him. Someone shouted a curse word, but he didn't move. It was then that he saw, among scattered bags and a pile of rubble next to an abandoned bus stop, a fallen body. A young man, dirty, bruised, with dried blood running from his forehead, breathing with difficulty. For a second, Leo thought he was just another homeless person, until he noticed that the watch on the man's wrist was a luxury brand, and his Italian shoe was torn but clearly expensive. The white shirt, though dirty and ripped, was made of fine fabric. This didn't make sense. Moved by something between instinct and disbelief, Leo parked his motorcycle haphazardly on the sidewalk and approached. The man didn't respond, but he was alive. His chest rose and fell slowly, and a low groan escaped his lips. The dog's gaze alternated between him and the injured man, as if demanding a decision. Leo knelt beside the man, touched his shoulder, and called out, but there was no response. He took out his phone but hesitated. Calling an ambulance could take hours in that traffic, and something about the whole situation told him there was no time to lose. He looked around. No one was paying attention. The city continued its indifferent flow. People rushed past with headphones in, eyes fixed on their phone screens. No one saw. No one wanted to see. That was how New York City worked. Every man for himself, each with their own problems. But Leo couldn't move on. Maybe it was the memory of his mother, who always said that ignoring someone in need was the same as throwing away your own humanity. Or maybe it was that look from the dog, which seemed to demand something from him that he didn't even know he had inside himself. In minutes, he made a decision. He placed the stranger on the back of his motorcycle, tied him on as best he could with the rope he used to secure deliveries, and sped off with the dog running alongside, even with her injured paw. The journey to the nearest hospital was hell. Traffic was at a standstill on Fifth Avenue, and Leo had to ride on the sidewalk, dodging pedestrians and risking fines he couldn't afford to pay. The man was unconscious, his weight destabilizing the motorcycle, and the dog, despite her injury, never stopped running alongside as if she were an escort. Leo felt his heart pounding, his hands sweating inside his gloves, his mind racing. What was he doing? Why was he risking everything for a stranger? When he finally arrived at St. Luke's Hospital in Morningside Heights, he was met with suspicion. Two security guards came towards him, looked at the unconscious man, at Leo covered in oil and sweat, and hesitated. He had to shout for a nurse to appear. She came running down, looked at the injured man, and started asking rapid-fire questions. Leo answered what he knew, which was almost nothing. He found the man collapsed. He didn't know who he was. He just wanted to help. The nurse signaled for a gurney, and two orderlies rushed the man inside. Leo stood there, motionless, with the thermal backpack still on his back, helmet in hand, taking a deep breath. The dog approached him, rested her muzzle on his leg, and sat down beside him. It was then that an older doctor, in an impeccable white coat and with a serious look, ran out of the emergency room and stopped when she saw the patient's face. She turned pale. She called someone on her radio. In seconds, the identity was confirmed. Ethan Hayes, heir to one of the country's largest corporate groups, missing for 2 days, police reports, newspaper headlines, a desperate family. And now, here he was, brought in by an anonymous motorcycle courier and a stray dog. The doctor walked back to Leo, looked him up and down, and asked how he had found Ethan. Leo repeated the story. The dog, the accident, the urgency. She wrote everything down, asked for his name, phone number, and address. Leo gave the information, but he already felt the weight of the situation. This was too big. He didn't want any trouble, he just wanted to go home. But before he could leave, a man in a dark suit appeared in the hallway. His face was tense, a phone pressed to his ear, his posture that of someone used to giving orders. It was Marcus Hayes, Ethan's older brother and vice president of the corporate group. He hung up the phone, looked at Leo, and approached slowly, as if evaluating every detail. He thanked him with a nod of his head, but there was no handshake, no human warmth. Just a dry, distant thank you. Leo felt a chill. There was something wrong with that thank you. Marcus turned and entered the room where Ethan was being treated. The doctor asked Leo to wait, in case they needed more information, and disappeared as well. He was left alone in the hallway with the dog by his side, not knowing what to do. It was at that moment that he noticed the activity on social media. Someone had filmed his arrival at the hospital. The video showed Leo getting off the motorcycle, with Ethan in his arms and the dog at his side, running into the emergency room. The footage already had thousands of views. Comments were exploding. Hero delivery rider, savior dog, missing millionaire. The internet was on fire. Leo's stomach churned. This was going to be a problem. He knew the city well enough to know that when someone like him appeared, in the headlines it was rarely for a good reason, soon there would be questions, investigations, suspicions. He had nothing to hide, but he also had nothing to protect him. He left the hospital without waiting any longer. He got on his motorcycle, called the dog, and the two of them left. She climbed onto the back without hesitation, as if she had always done it, and Leo sped towards his apartment in Queens, a 300-square-foot studio that barely fit a bed and a stove. When he got home, he gave the dog water, improvised a plate of food with what he had in the fridge, and sat on the floor exhausted. She lay down beside him, rested her head on his leg, and closed her eyes. Leo looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled. He didn't know who this dog was. He didn't know why she had chosen him, of all people, but he felt that somehow the two of them were connected. That night, Leo barely slept. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Messages from acquaintances, from work colleagues, from people he didn't even remember had his number. Everyone wanted to know the story. Everyone wanted details. He turned off the phone and tried to rest, but his mind wouldn't stop. Who was Ethan Hayes? What had happened to him? Why had the dog led him to him? And why did he feel like this was just the beginning? The next morning, Leo woke up early as usual, but something was different. The dog was awake, sitting by the door, looking at him with those penetrating eyes. He got up, made coffee, gave her food, and decided to take her to the vet before starting his delivery shift. There was a clinic a few blocks away, and he couldn't leave her like this, injured and uncared for. The vet, a middle-aged man named Dr. Evans, examined the dog carefully. He checked her paw, cleaned the wounds, applied an ointment, and then noticed something, a tattoo on her inner ear. He took a magnifying glass, looked closer, and turned pale. He went back to his computer, typed something, and then turned to Leo with a serious expression. Nina, XK9. A police dog retired after being injured during a rescue mission. Adopted by a civilian 2 years ago, missing for 6 months. Her file indicated a history of intense training, participation in search and rescue operations, medals of honor. Nina was no ordinary dog. She was a forgotten hero. Leo listened to all of this in silence, processing every piece of information. He looked at Nina, who stared back at him with the same serenity as always, and he understood. She hadn't chosen him by chance. She was doing what she had always done, saving lives, protecting those in danger. And for some reason, Ethan Hayes needed to be saved. But from what? From whom? When he left the clinic, Leo made a decision. He was going to look for answers. He couldn't just go back to his routine and pretend nothing had happened. Something much bigger was at play, and he, without fully understanding why, felt he had a role to play. He went back home, changed his clothes, got Nina, and went to the hospital. He needed to see Ethan. He needed to understand what had happened. On the way, he passed a newsstand and saw the headline. Heir found by delivery rider and dog. His picture was on the cover, his face magnified next to Nina's. Leo bought the paper, read the article, and felt a lump in his throat. The report speculated about Ethan's disappearance, mentioned possible family conflicts, inheritance disputes, but nothing concrete. Everything was vague, carefully written, not to compromise anyone. When he arrived at the hospital, he was stopped at the reception. Ethan was in a restricted wing, and only family members were allowed to visit. Leo insisted, but it was no use. That's when Nina started to whine, quietly, but insistently, as if she knew she needed to be there. The receptionist looked at the dog, hesitated, and then made a call. Minutes later, a nurse came down and asked Leo to wait. It was then that Marcus Hayes appeared again. This time he wasn't alone. There was a woman by his side, elegant, with her hair in a bun and a cold gaze. It was Beatrice Hayes, Ethan and Marcus's mother, the family matriarch and chairwoman of the corporate group's board. She looked Leo up and down, evaluating every detail, and then her gaze shifted to Nina. For a second, something in her expression changed. Surprise, recognition. But it quickly returned to a mask of control. Marcus got straight to the point. He thanked him, again for the rescue, but asked that Leo not give any interviews to maintain discretion, to let the family handle the matter. There was more at stake than it seemed, he explained, and the exposure could put Ethan at risk. Leo agreed, but asked for just one thing, to see Ethan, just for a few minutes. Beatrice hesitated, but then nodded. Marcus protested, but she raised a hand, silencing him. Leo was taken to the room, accompanied by Nina. When they entered, Ethan was awake, lying in bed with bandages on his forehead and arms. He looked at Leo without recognition, but when he saw Nina, something changed. His eyes widened, his body relaxed. He held out his hand, and Nina approached, resting her muzzle on his fingers. Ethan began to cry, soundlessly, just tears streaming down his face. Leo stood there, not knowing what to do, just watching. It was then that Ethan whispered almost inaudibly, "Thank you. Thank you for not letting me die." At that moment, Leo knew that something very profound had happened, and that somehow his life and Ethan's were now intertwined in a way he did not yet fully understand. The following days were a blur of emotions, news reports, and uncomfortable silences. Leo returned to his delivery routine, but nothing was the same. People recognized his face on the streets. Some honked in support, others asked invasive questions. The instant fame the internet had given him brought no practical benefits, only the curiosity of others and constant discomfort. He tried to ignore it, to keep his head down and move on, but it was impossible to forget what had happened, especially because Nina was now part of his life. The dog adapted quickly to his routine. She would wait at the door every morning, accompany him to the motorcycle, and stay at home during his deliveries as if she knew he would return. At night she would lie beside him, always alert, always vigilant. Leo had never had a pet. He grew up in small apartments where animals weren't allowed, and later, on his own, he never had the time or money to care for anyone but himself. But Nina was different. She demanded nothing. She was just there, a silent presence that made him feel less alone. It was on a Tuesday, almost a week after the rescue, that Leo received a call from an unknown number. He hesitated to answer, but something made him press the green button. On the other end, a firm and polite voice introduced himself as Dr. Albert Mendez, Ethan Hayes' private physician. He explained that Ethan had asked to see him again, and that this time the family had authorized the visit. Leo agreed, set a time, and the next day went to the hospital accompanied by Nina. When they entered the room, Ethan was sitting up in bed, a laptop on his lap, and some papers scattered around him. He looked better. His face had more color. The bandages had been reduced, and his eyes, though still tired, had a light that wasn't there before. When he saw Nina, he smiled. It was a small but sincere smile. She approached, rested her head on his knee, and closed her eyes. Ethan gently stroked the dog's ear and then looked at Leo. "Thank you for coming back," he said. His voice was deep but soft. Leo nodded and sat in the chair next to the bed. For a few seconds, they sat in silence, just watching Nina, who seemed completely at peace between them. It was Ethan who broke the silence. "You know who I am, don't you?" Leo confirmed. "Everyone knows who you are." Ethan smiled again, but this time there was bitterness in the gesture. "Everyone thinks they know who I am, but nobody really knows." Leo didn't respond. He waited. Ethan took a deep breath, closed the laptop, and began to speak. He told him that in recent months his life had become a silent nightmare. Constant pressure from the family to take on responsibilities he didn't want. Suffocating expectations, endless meetings about mergers, acquisitions, market strategies. He had never asked to be the heir to an empire. He never wanted to carry that weight. But there was no choice, or at least that's what everyone said. Ethan explained that weeks before his disappearance, he had discovered something he wasn't supposed to know. Strange financial movements within one of the group's companies, transfers to offshore accounts, fictitious contracts, money being siphoned off in an almost imperceptible but constant way. He tried to investigate on his own, without alarming anyone, but he made a mistake. He trusted the wrong person. That's when everything fell apart. One night, leaving a meeting at the office, he was ambushed by two hooded men in an empty parking garage. He tried to fight back but was knocked out. When he woke up, he was in a dark, cold place, with no idea how much time had passed. There were voices, someone saying he knew too much, someone ordering him to be eliminated. But he managed to escape. He took advantage of a moment of carelessness, ran, hid, wandered the streets not knowing where to go. And then, exhausted and injured, he collapsed on that sidewalk, expecting the worst. Leo listened in silence, processing every word. This was bigger than he had imagined. It wasn't just a kidnapping. It was an attempt to silence him, and the obvious question was, who was behind it? Ethan wasn't sure, but he suspected someone very close, someone within his own family. "Do you trust your mother?" Leo asked, breaking the silence. Ethan hesitated. "Yes, I think so. But she's blind when it comes to protecting the empire. She would do anything to keep everything running. Anything." "And your brother?" Leo pressed. Ethan looked away. "Marcus has always been ambitious, always wanted to be the chosen one. But I don't know if he'd be capable of something like this, or maybe I just don't want to believe it." At that moment, the door opened, and Beatrice Hayes entered the room. She wore an impeccable suit, her hair in an elegant bun, her eyes fixed on Leo. She said nothing, just approached, looked at Ethan and then at Nina. The dog raised her head but didn't move. Beatrice reached out and lightly touched her head. It was a quick, almost involuntary gesture, but laden with something Leo couldn't identify. Sadness? Guilt? Beatrice then turned to Leo. "I appreciate what you did," she said, "but now it's best you let my son rest. He needs to recover." Leo stood up, but Ethan interrupted him. "Mother, I want him to stay. He saved me. He has a right to know what's happening." Beatrice took a deep breath, clearly annoyed, but didn't argue. She just nodded and left the room, closing the door firmly. Ethan looked at Leo and whispered, "She's scared. Scared that I'll find out the truth. Scared that everything will fall apart." Leo felt a chill. "Do you think she knows something?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know, but someone does. And I'm going to find out who." In the following days, Leo began to help Ethan discreetly. He used his mobility as a courier to go to places Ethan couldn't. He picked up documents from offices, visited contacts, Ethan indicated, avoiding the eyes of those behind the attempt to silence him. Nina accompanied them on every trip, always alert, always one step ahead. The former police dog seemed to understand every move, every threat. It was during one of these missions that Leo met Julia, Ethan's personal assistant. She was 28, with brown hair cut to shoulder length, expressive green eyes, and a posture that mixed professionalism with vulnerability. When Leo arrived at her office to pick up some files, Julia greeted him with suspicion. "Who are you? Why did Ethan ask me to give this to you?" Leo explained briefly, without going into detail. Julia listened, observed Nina at his side, and then handed him a sealed envelope. But before he left, she asked, "Is he okay? Really?" Leo stopped, turned, and saw in her eyes something he recognized immediately. Genuine concern. Not the professional concern of an employee, but the concern of someone who cared deeply. "He's recovering," Leo replied, "but he needs help." Julia hesitated, looked around, and then whispered, "If you need me, I'll help. Ethan is a good person, and he doesn't deserve what they did to him." Leo thanked her and left, but that conversation stuck in his head. There was something between Julia and Ethan, something that went beyond a professional relationship, and maybe that was important. When he returned to the hospital and gave the envelope to Ethan, he opened it urgently. Inside were copies of bank transactions, signed contracts, and a list of names. Ethan read everything carefully, his face growing more and more serious. "It's worse than I thought," he muttered. Leo moved closer. "What's in there?" Ethan showed him one of the documents, movements of millions of dollars to offshore accounts, contracts for phantom construction projects, and in the middle of it all, signatures he didn't recognize but which were in his name. "Someone is using my identity to embezzle money," Ethan explained, "and if this is discovered, I'll be held responsible. They've put me in a perfect trap." Leo's stomach churned. "This is serious. You need to go to the police." Ethan shook his head. "I can't. If I do that, the family will be exposed. The group will collapse, and my mother will never forgive me. Besides, I don't know who to trust. If someone in the family is involved, the police might be compromised too." Leo understood the dilemma. Ethan was trapped. He couldn't report it without destroying everything around him, but he also couldn't stay silent and be held responsible for crimes he didn't commit. It was an impossible crossroads. It was at that moment that Nina, who was lying at Ethan's feet, raised her head and began to growl softly. Leo and Ethan looked at the door. Seconds later, there was a knock. Ethan quickly hid the documents under his pillow and said, "Come in." The door opened and Marcus entered. He was impeccable as always, but there was tension in his face. He looked at Leo, at Nina, and then at Ethan. "We need to talk," Marcus said. "Alone." Ethan looked at Leo, hesitated, but then nodded. Leo left the room with Nina, but stayed outside, close enough to hear fragments of the conversation. The voices were muffled, but the tension was palpable. "You shouldn't be investigating this on your own," Marcus was saying. "You don't know what you're getting into," Ethan replied with something Leo couldn't quite hear. Then Marcus raised his voice. "Do you think you're the only one who wants to protect the family? Do you think you're the only one who carries this weight? I'm trying to hold everything together too, but you're putting it all at risk with this obsession." There was silence. Then Ethan's voice, low and firm. "I just want the truth, and if you know something, you'd better tell me now." Marcus didn't answer. The door opened abruptly and he stormed out, walking past Leo without looking at him. Nina growled again, but Leo calmed her down. When he went back inside, Ethan was pale. "What happened?" Leo asked. Ethan took a deep breath. "He knows something, I'm sure of it. But he won't tell me. He's protecting someone. Or he's involved." That night, Leo returned home exhausted. His head ached from thinking so much. He was getting involved in something much bigger than he could handle. But he also couldn't just abandon Ethan. There was something about him that sparked empathy. Maybe it was the fact that despite all the fortune and the powerful surname, Ethan seemed just as lost as he was. Two men trapped in different, but equally suffocating labyrinths. Nina lay down beside Leo, and he stroked her head. "You brought this into my life, didn't you?" he said, smiling sadly. "There's no turning back now." Nina looked at him with those penetrating eyes, and Leo had the impression that she understood every word. The next day, Leo received another call. This time, it was Julia. She was nervous, her voice trembling. "We need to talk, in person, it's urgent." Leo arranged to meet her at a cafe downtown, far from the office and anywhere they might be seen. When he arrived, Julia was already there, sitting in a corner, nervously stirring a cup of cold coffee. Leo sat down, and she got straight to the point. "I found something you need to know. About Marcus." Leo leaned forward. "What?" Julia hesitated, looked around, and then whispered. "He's about to close a deal with an international group. A deal that will transfer part of the control of the corporate group outside the family. And he's doing it without Ethan's or his mother's knowledge." Leo's blood ran cold. "Why would he do that?" Julia shook her head. "I don't know, but there are rumors that he's in debt. Huge debts. From gambling, bad investments, I'm not sure. But he needs money fast, and he's willing to sell off part of the inheritance to get it." Leo processed the information. That explained a lot. If Marcus was desperate, he could have orchestrated the attack on Ethan to get him out of the way and have the freedom to do whatever he wanted, or worse, to eliminate him and take everything. "Do you have proof of this?" Leo asked. Julia opened her purse and took out a flash drive. "Here are copies of emails, preliminary contracts, and bank statements. I managed to access the system before they changed the passwords. But now I'm scared. If they find out it was me, I could be in danger." Leo took the flash drive and put it in his pocket. "I'll take this to Ethan, but you need to protect yourself. Get out of the city for a few days. Go somewhere safe." Julia agreed, but then asked, "How is he, really?" Leo noticed the emotion in her voice. "He's fighting, and I think he's going to need all the friends he can get." Julia nodded, her eyes welling up. "I love him, you know. I never had the courage to tell him, but I do." Leo didn't know what to say. He just lightly touched her shoulder and left the cafe. As he walked back to his motorcycle, he felt the weight of the flash drive in his pocket. It was dynamite, and he was at the center of the explosion. The night fell over New York with that orange hue that stained the polluted sky. Leo arrived at the hospital with the flash drive in his pocket, Nina at his side, and his heart beating way too fast. He knew that what he was about to show Ethan would change everything. There was no going back now. The truth, however painful, had to come out. When he entered the room, he found Ethan standing, looking out the window. He had been medically discharged but chose to stay a few more days at the hospital, claiming he needed rest. In reality, Leo knew he was afraid to go home, afraid to face his family, afraid to confirm his suspicions. Ethan turned as he heard the door close. He looked at Leo and immediately realized something was wrong. What? What happened? Leo took the flash drive from his pocket and placed it on the table. Julia gave me this today. You need to see it. Ethan took the device, plugged it into his laptop, and began to open the files. As he read, his face grew increasingly tense. His hands trembled, his eyes widened. When he finished, he slammed the laptop shut and sat on the bed, breathing heavily. "My brother," he muttered. "My own brother." Leo approached. "He's selling off part of the company. And from what? Julia found out he's doing it to pay off debts." Ethan ran his hands over his face. "He was always competitive, always wanted to prove he was better than me, but I never thought he was capable of betraying the family like this, of betraying me like this." A heavy silence fell. Nina approached Ethan and rested her head on his knee, as she always did when she sensed he needed her. Ethan mechanically petted the dog, lost in thought. Then he lifted his head and looked at Leo. "I need to confront him now." Leo shook his head. "No. Not yet. If you confront him now, he'll deny everything, destroy the evidence, and maybe do something worse. We have to be smarter." Ethan hesitated, but he knew Leo was right. "So what do we do?" Leo thought for a moment. "Julia said the deal hasn't been closed yet. He needs one final signature. If we can stop that, he loses everything. And if he loses everything, maybe he'll confess what he did." Ethan nodded. "But how do we stop it?" Leo smiled faintly. "You're the heir. You have power. Use it." That night, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He called his mother and asked her to convene an emergency board meeting. Beatrice was surprised, questioned the reason, but Ethan was firm. "It's urgent. Trust me." She hesitated, but then agreed. The meeting would be the next morning, at the family's headquarters on the Upper East Side. Leo left the hospital with Nina, but this time he felt something different. He was no longer just a spectator. He was inside the story, and as strange as it was, he didn't want to leave. Maybe it was the sense of purpose, maybe it was the friendship that had formed with Ethan. Or maybe it was Nina, who looked at him with those eyes that seemed to say he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The next morning, Ethan left the hospital for the first time since the rescue. He put on a dark suit that Julia had brought, fixed his hair and tried to hide the marks of his injuries with makeup. Leo was waiting for him in front of the hospital with his motorcycle. Ethan looked at the vehicle and smiled. "I've never ridden on the back of a motorcycle." Leo returned the smile. First, time for everything. Nina was already settled, and Ethan got on behind Leo. The three of them rode through the busy streets of New York, and for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt something like freedom. When they arrived at the office, an imposing building of glass and concrete, they were met with surprised looks. Ethan got off the bike, adjusted his suit, and walked in with Nina at his side and Leo close behind. The receptionist tried to stop Leo from going up, but Ethan intervened. "He's with me." She hesitated but didn't argue. On the 23rd floor, the boardroom was full. Beatrice sat at the head of the table, impeccable as always. Marcus was next to her, a tense expression on his face. There were 6 other board members, all men and women over 50, with decades of business experience. When Ethan entered with Nina and Leo, the silence was immediate. Beatrice frowned. "Ethan, what is the meaning of this? Who is he?" Ethan pulled up a chair and sat down. "This is Leo. He saved me, and he stays." Marcus intervened. "This is a private meeting. He can't be here." Ethan looked directly at his brother. "He stays, and so does Nina." Beatrice was about to protest, but something in Ethan's posture made her back down. She nodded, and the meeting began. Ethan got straight to the point. I called this meeting because I discovered something that threatens the future of our group. Someone here is making secret deals to sell off part of the company's control without the board's knowledge. There was a murmur of surprise. Marcus turned pale. Beatrice leaned forward. What are you talking about? Ethan connected the flash drive to the projector and began to show the documents. Emails, preliminary, contracts, bank transfers. Everything pointed to Marcus. The room fell into absolute silence. All eyes turned to Marcus. He tried to maintain his composure, but the panic on his face was visible. This is ridiculous. Where did you get this information? It's been forged. Ethan shook his head. No, it hasn't, and you know it. Beatrice rose slowly, looking at Marcus with an expression that mixed disappointment and disbelief. Marcus, is this true? Marcus took a deep breath, and for a moment it seemed he would deny everything. But then something in him broke. He lowered his head and whispered, Yes, it's true. The silence that followed was deafening. Beatrice sat down again as if her legs had given out. Why? Why would you do this? Marcus lifted his face, and there were tears in his eyes. Because I'm drowning in debt, because I made bad investments, because I tried to prove I was as capable as Ethan and failed miserably, and because I didn't have the courage to ask for help. Ethan felt something strange. It wasn't anger. It was pity. But there was still one question that needed to be asked. Were you the one who had me attacked? Marcus's eyes widened. What? No, I swear I wasn't. I knew you were investigating the finances, and I was afraid you'd find out about my deals, but I would never do something like that. Never. There was silence. Ethan wanted to believe him, but he wasn't sure. It was then that one of the board members, an elderly man named Henry, spoke up. If it wasn't Marcus, then who was it? Ethan had no answer. And that's when he realized there was someone else involved, someone they hadn't identified yet. Beatrice took the floor. This meeting is suspended. We will investigate all of this internally. Marcus, you are relieved of all your duties until further notice. Marcus nodded, defeated. He stood up and left the room without looking at anyone. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. This wasn't how he wanted things to end, but it was necessary. After the meeting, Ethan, Leo, and Nina left the building. Ethan was exhausted, emotionally and physically. Leo noticed. Want to go home? Ethan shook his head. No, not yet. I need some air. They walked to a nearby park, Central Park, and sat on a bench in the shade of a tree. Nina lay down at their feet, and the three of them sat there in silence, just watching people pass by. It was Ethan who broke the silence. Do you think he's telling the truth? That he wasn't the one who attacked me? Leo hesitated. I don't know, but I think he was being sincere. The problem is, if it wasn't him, then who was it? Ethan sighed. Someone with a lot to lose. Someone who wants me out of the way. Leo looked at him. Do you have any idea who it could be? Ethan thought for a long moment. There is someone who has always been in the background, but I don't want to believe it. Leo turned to him. Who? Before Ethan could answer, his phone rang. It was Julia. He answered, and on the other end, her voice was desperate. Ethan, I need to talk to you, now. It's about your mother. Ethan tensed. What about her? Julia hesitated. I found something. Something she's been hiding from all of you. Please, come to my apartment. I can't talk over the phone. Ethan agreed, hung up, and looked at Leo. We have to go. They went to Julia's apartment in a modest building in Greenwich Village. When they rang the bell, she opened the door quickly, looked both ways, and pulled them inside. The apartment was small, but cozy, with books scattered everywhere and the aroma of fresh coffee in the air. Julia was visibly nervous. She sat on the sofa and took a deep breath before starting. I was investigating the company's finances, trying to better understand the suspicious movements, and I found something I shouldn't have. Years ago, your mother signed a secret agreement with a group of international investors. An agreement that gives them significant equity if something happens to you or Marcus. Ethan turned pale. What are you saying? Julia continued. She did it to protect the company. If something happened to the heirs, the group wouldn't be left without leadership. But the problem is, these investors have their own interests, and if they decide it's more profitable to eliminate the heirs and take control, they can do it. Ethan felt his world crumble. My mother did this? Julia nodded. She probably thought she was protecting the family legacy, but in doing so, she put you both at risk, Leo intervened. So the attack could have been orchestrated by these investors, Julia confirmed. It's possible. They have a lot to gain from Ethan being out of the picture. Ethan stood up, pacing back and forth. I need to talk to her. I need to understand why she did this. Julia held his arm. Be careful. If she realizes you know, she might try to protect the agreement at all costs. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time since they met, he let his guard down. Julia, I don't know who to trust anymore. She held his face in her hands. Trust me, I would never betray you. Never. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world around them disappeared. Ethan lightly touched her face, and they kissed. It was a kiss laden with emotion, fear, and hope. When they parted, Julia whispered, I love you. I always have. Ethan smiled sadly. Me too, but I'm afraid this will put you in danger. Julia shook her head. It doesn't matter. We'll face this together. Leo, who had been watching from a distance, felt a pang of emotion. There was something pure in that moment, something that contrasted with all the rottenness they had uncovered. Nina approached him and rested her head on his leg, as if she understood what he was feeling. Later that night, Ethan decided to confront his mother. He went to the family mansion, a massive property on Park Avenue, surrounded by high walls and security cameras. Leo accompanied him but stayed outside with Nina, waiting. Ethan went in alone, prepared for the confrontation. Beatrice was in the library, reading an old book. When she saw her son, she closed the book and set it aside. Ethan, what brings you here at this hour? He sat in the armchair across from her. I need you to tell me the truth, about the secret agreement, about the investors. Beatrice tensed. How do you know about that? Ethan leaned forward. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you put Marcus and me at risk, and now someone is trying to eliminate me because of it. Beatrice stood up, walking to the window. I did what I thought was necessary. The corporate group is bigger than any of us. If something happened to me, to you, or to Marcus, everything would fall apart. I needed to ensure continuity. Ethan shook his head. You ensured our destruction. Those investors don't care about us, they only care about profit. And if they realize it's more profitable to eliminate us, they will. Beatrice turned to him, her eyes welling up. I never wanted it to come to this. I just wanted to protect what your grandfather built, what I built. Ethan stood up. I know. But protection can't come at the cost of our lives. There was a heavy silence. Beatrice approached Ethan and touched his face gently. You're just like your father, you always were. He had that same righteousness, that need to do the right thing, and it destroyed him. Ethan held her hand. Then help me not to be destroyed. Cancel the agreement. Protect the family for real. Beatrice hesitated, but then nodded. I'll try, but I don't know if I can. These men are powerful, and they don't accept losing. Ethan looked into her eyes. Then we'll face them together, as a family. When Ethan left the mansion, he felt both relieved and apprehensive. He had taken the first step toward fixing things, but he knew the road ahead was still long and dangerous. The following days were spent in preparation. Beatrice called an extraordinary meeting with the international investors, scheduled for the following week. The goal was to renegotiate the terms of the agreement and, if possible, terminate it for good. Ethan knew it would be a difficult battle. Those men wouldn't easily give up the control they had silently acquired over the years. But he was determined. For the first time in a long time, he felt he had a purpose greater than simply carrying a surname. Meanwhile, Leo returned to his delivery routine, but nothing was the same. People recognized him on the streets. Some greeted him, others made jokes. The fame had passed, but the memory remained. Nina stayed by his side, always faithful, always present. And in some strange way, that dog had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. It wasn't just the involvement with Ethan. It was something deeper. It was the feeling that he mattered, that his choices had weight, that his existence made a difference. It was on a rainy Wednesday afternoon that everything started to fall into place. Ethan called Leo, asking him to come to a law firm in the city center. There was something he needed to show him. Leo took Nina and went. When he arrived, he found Ethan with a lawyer who had gray hair and a stern demeanor. He introduced himself as Gilbert Ramos Escance, a specialist in corporate law and a trusted friend of the Hayes family for decades. Mr. Ramos had a series of documents in his hands. Ethan asked Leo to sit down and began to explain. I asked Mr. Ramos to thoroughly investigate the agreement my mother signed, and he found something important. Mr. Ramos adjusted his glasses and began to speak. The agreement has a termination clause, a clause that allows the family to end the contract if they can prove that the investors acted in bad faith or attempted to harm the heirs in any way. Leo leaned forward. And you have proof of that? Mr. Ramos looked at Ethan, who nodded. We do. Thanks to the investigations that you and Julia conducted, we were able to trace suspicious movements. Money transfers to offshore accounts linked to one of the investors. Third-party contracts that were used to sabotage the company's deals. And most importantly, evidence that they were planning to permanently remove Ethan. Leo felt a chill. So they really were behind the attack, Mr. Ramos confirmed. All signs point to yes, and that gives us the legal grounds to break the agreement. Ethan took a deep breath. But there's a problem. If we break the agreement, they could retaliate, try to harm the company in other ways, or worse, try something against us again. Mr. Ramos shook his head. That's why we need protection. I've already contacted the proper authorities. The FBI is aware of the situation and will open a formal investigation. But we need to act fast. The meeting is in 2 days. Ethan looked at Leo. I want you to be there. You're a part of this now. Leo hesitated. I don't know if it's my place. Ethan smiled. You saved me. You helped uncover the truth. It is your place. On the morning of the meeting, the atmosphere was heavy. Beatrice had invited the key investors to a meeting at the central office. There were 3 men, Richard Goldman, a 60-year-old American who owned a multi-billion-dollar investment fund, Eduardo Carvalho, a Brazilian businessman who walked the line between legal and questionable, and Martin Schneider, a cold and calculating German known for his ruthless negotiations. The 3 entered the boardroom with the confidence of those who had always come out on top. Beatrice opened the meeting with a diplomatic tone. Thank you all for coming. I've called this meeting to discuss the terms of our agreement. Richard Goldman leaned forward, smiling. I see no reason for a revision. Everything is working perfectly. Beatrice took a deep breath. Actually, we've discovered some irregularities. Irregularities that lead us to believe there has been bad faith on your part. Eduardo Carvalho frowned. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Hayes. I hope you have proof. That's when Mr. Ramos entered the room, accompanied by 2 FBI agents. Martin Schneider turned pale. What is the meaning of this? Mr. Ramos placed a folder on the table. Here is all the proof. Suspicious bank transfers, fraudulent contracts, and evidence that you plan to harm the Hayes family to assume total control of the company. Richard Goldman tried to stand up, but the agents blocked the exit. You have nothing. This won't hold up. Beatrice looked directly at him. It already has. The FBI has opened an investigation, and you will answer for everything. Eduardo Carvalho tried to negotiate. We can reach an agreement. No one has to know anything. Ethan stood up. No more secret agreements, no more lies. You will answer for what you've done. The 3 investors were taken in for questioning. The agreement was officially terminated, and the Hayes family regained full control of the company. But the wounds were still open. Marcus had been removed from his duties, but Ethan decided to give him a second chance. He called his brother for a private conversation, and the 2 sat face to face for the first time in weeks. I forgive you, Ethan said, but I need you to understand that trust is rebuilt slowly. Marcus nodded, his eyes welling up. I ruined everything. I don't know if I can forgive myself. Ethan touched his brother's shoulder. Start over. We can always start over. Marcus smiled sadly. Thank you for not giving up on me. As the family restructured, Leo began to realize that his life was also changing. Julia had offered him a job at the corporate group as a logistics coordinator. It was a position that combined his experience on the streets with the opportunity for professional growth. Leo hesitated, but Ethan insisted. You deserve this, and we trust you. Leo accepted, but on one condition. Nina comes with me. Ethan smiled. Of course. She's part of the team now. Months passed. Life returned to a calmer rhythm. Ethan and Julia publicly announced their relationship, and Ethan's mother, after some initial resistance, accepted and even came to admire Julia's strength. Marcus began working on smaller projects, slowly rebuilding his reputation, and Beatrice, for the first time in years, allowed herself to rest a little, delegating more responsibilities to her sons. Leo adapted well to his new job. He still missed the streets, the freedom of the motorcycle, but he liked the stability. And Nina, now a constant presence in the office, became the unofficial mascot of the company. Employees would stop to pet her, and she, always patient, accepted the attention with dignity. It was on a Friday afternoon, a few months after the meeting that ended the agreement, that Ethan called Leo for a private conversation. The two sat on the office terrace with a privileged view of New York City. Nina lay down between them, as she always did. I wanted to thank you, Ethan said, for everything. You changed my life. Leo smiled. I think we changed each other's lives. Ethan nodded. It's true. Before all this, I was lost, living on autopilot, doing what was expected of me, but feeling nothing. You showed me that there are still things worth fighting for. Leo looked out at the city. I was lost too. I thought my life was just that. Deliveries, rushing, survival. But you and Nina showed me that we can be more than what our circumstances dictate. The two were silent for a moment, just watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. Nina stood up, yawned and stretched as if she were satisfied with everything. Ethan petted her head. She's incredible, isn't she? Leo agreed. She saved us, in so many ways. Ethan looked at Leo. Have you ever thought about adopting another dog, to keep Nina company? Leo smiled. I've thought about it, but I think Nina is one of a kind. I don't know if another dog could keep up with her. They laughed together, and for the first time since they met, everything seemed to be in its place. It wasn't a perfect life. There were scars, painful memories, challenges still to face, but it was a life with purpose, and that made all the difference. That night, Leo returned to his apartment, which was now a bit larger and more comfortable. He made dinner, fed Nina, and sat on the couch. He picked up his phone and saw a message from Ethan. Thanks for everything, brother. Leo smiled and replied, Always. Nina lay down beside him, rested her head on his leg, and closed her eyes. Leo stroked her fur, feeling a deep gratitude for everything that had happened. The city of New York continued its frantic pace outside, cars, horns, people rushing. But inside that small apartment there was peace, there was silence, there was love. And above all, there was the certainty that, even in the most unlikely places, life can surprise us with encounters that change everything. Nina opened one eye, looked at Leo, and seemed to smile. He smiled back. You knew all along, didn't you, that it would all work out? She closed her eye again, and Leo understood that some things didn't need words, just presence, just loyalty, just unconditional love. And so that rainy Thursday that had started as just another ordinary day turned into the beginning of a new story, a story of redemption, friendship, courage, and second chances. Because sometimes all we need is a simple gesture, someone who refuses to leave us behind, someone who reminds us that it's always worth fighting, always worth believing, always worth starting over. life went on. Ethan took over as president of the corporate group, implementing ethical and transparent changes that transformed the company into a market example. Julia became the director of human resources, creating inclusion and development programs that changed the lives of hundreds of employees. Marcus found his calling in social projects, using his business experience to help underprivileged communities, and Beatrice finally allowed herself to be just a mother, supporting her children without imposing suffocating expectations. Leo grew within the company, becoming an operations manager and a mentor to young professionals from marginalized communities. He never forgot where he came from and used his story to inspire others to believe in their own journeys. And Nina, the retired police dog who had saved a millionaire and changed the life of a motorcycle courier, lived out her final years surrounded by love, comfort, and gratitude. When Nina finally passed, years later, peacefully, and surrounded by the people she loved, Leo and Ethan planted a tree in Central Park in her honor. A simple plaque read, "Nina, the hero who taught us never to give up." And every time they passed by, they would stop for a moment, look at the tree, and remember everything that brave dog had represented in their lives. Because in the end, it's not the fortunes accumulated or the titles earned that define who we are. It's the gestures we make when no one is looking. It's the hands we extend to those who have fallen. It's the lives we touch without expecting anything in return. And it's the loves, human or not, that remind us that we are never alone. The city of New York, with all its chaos, its beauty and its contradictions, continued to be the stage for thousands of stories. But among them all, the story of Leo, Ethan and Nina shone with a special light. A light that reminds us that, even in the midst of traffic, noise and indifference, there is still room for kindness. There is still room for love. There is still room for hope. And that's what keeps us alive. That's what makes us human. That's what gives us the strength to face each new day, each new challenge, each new journey. Because as long as there is someone willing to stop, look back and extend a hand, there will always be a reason to believe that the world can be better. One gesture at a time, one life at a time, one new beginning at a time.